So just a quick, I just want to connect today's talk to the Clean Water Act. That's the theme that we picked for this year's conference. And it's been 50 years and lots of amazing things have come about as a result of the Clean Water Act. So just wanted to share quickly. I think I'm going to use this slide every time, but just to remind people where we were 50 years ago before the Clean Water Act really kicked in. Things were not good across the nation, and Maine in particular. Some pictures of the Androscoggin River that showed, you know, things were not good. The foamy Androscoggin, as they say. So, and as a result of the Clean Water Act, lots of great things have happened in terms of lake and water quality. In terms of the ability to regulate pollutants and implement control programs, pollution control programs, set water quality standards, lots of great things. And I'm just going to touch on it very briefly just to connect the talk today to the Clean Water Act. Chris is going to tell us more about salt and chlorides and what they do to water quality, but you know, the Clean Water Act lets us monitor lakes and identify those that are impaired and that need more attention and more action. So those are those 303. We have a 303D list. Every state has one. We have no lakes are on that list, but a couple of different streams are on the 303D list, including Long Creek, which is in Greater Portland, all around the main mall. And Chris reminded me when we met before he had the talk this afternoon, he mentioned that Long Creek is a watershed that is impaired by high levels of chloride. So chloride does impact our water quality. We are lucky to not have any lakes impaired at the moment, but as Chris will explain to you, there's a lot of interesting things going on with chloride. And I'll just tell you briefly, this is an old study from 2008 that the University of Maine did, but in 2008, Maine was spending $76 per person, per capita, on road salt for our roads. And the DOT was purchasing 490 tons of rock salt and dispersing that over 23,450 miles of state roads. So there's a lot of salt out there, and I know that our members have growing concerns about the impacts of salt. I'm sure many of you have been on roads that go right alongside a lake, and you know, you have to wonder where all that salt is going and what it's doing potentially to our water bodies. So Chris has, that's what Chris is here to tell us about. I think I have just one more slide that goes back to Chris. So I want to introduce Chris Navistsky. He is the Lake George waterkeeper, works for the Lake George Association in upstate New York. And you have read hopefully you've read his bio, so I won't read through that again. Hopefully you read it while it was running through the slides. But I will tell you, I heard him speak at a national conference a couple of years ago, and it stuck in my head that we really should get him to Maine to talk about the work that he's done in New York State. And then, like I said, a lot of our members, I heard from a lot of Maine Lakes members who, with lake associations and other community groups that were really starting to ask the question, what is all this chloride doing to Maine's water? So without further ado, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, and it's great to be here, Susan. I'm hoping that my presentation is showing up.
It is.
Oh, great. And I really wish that I was up in Maine. Actually, you said you were going to bring me up to Maine, so I will take a rain check on that sometime and hopefully get up there and see. Well, I know your lakes anyway. But anyway, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Navistsky, Lake George waterkeeper, and I'm glad that there was the introduction of the Clean Water Act, because those of you who may not be familiar, that's what one of our main jobs as waterkeepers are, and we're a national, international organization, really is to take the Clean Water Act, which was the basis of being a waterkeeper, and focus on the protection of our water bodies and applying our laws and making sure that they protect our waters. My talk, I've some of this will, if you saw my talk at the Maine Stormwater Conference, December 2019, some of this will seem familiar. It has the same title. It's called You Are the Salt of the Earth. And I will get to the reason that I selected that in a minute. Here's our salt-filled agenda. All our talks start off with science. Our work, we call it Science to Solutions. It's based in science, and all our decisions, policy recommendations, advocacy is supported with science. But with that, we implemented a model for protection. There should be an N on the end of that, but that's really our approach. And we'll go over how we reduce road salt with this model. We'll talk about the best practices, swim certification, sustainable winter management certification, an actual certification program that has been established, and our next steps and takeaways. So this is where the quote comes from. It says, this is Israel Moore Ayafor, and he's an inspirational author, and the quote is, "You are the salt of the earth, but remember that salt is useful when in association, but useless in isolation." And really that's what caught me, is that, and we're never saying never use salt, but salt is just one of the tools, but we cannot rely on it exclusively, because, you know, we're seeing that, is salt really that bad? It can be bad. And if we rely on it solely, as many of you know, as advocates to protect your water bodies, that speak for your water bodies, there's many tools that you need, and salt is just one of them. And hopefully you'll learn some of the other practices that we have here. So is salt really that bad? I mean, yeah, it causes corrosion, personal impacts, car destruction. We've all driven along the roadways and seen the burn on our trees, on our evergreens. You know, it's said that 50% of the salt that gets applied to the roads actually gets into our soils and into our groundwater, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. There's a corrosion to our public infrastructure, our bridges, our roads. It causes that freeze thaw, melts it. The ice and the snow, it gets into the cracks in the roads, the freeze thaws, that we are just going to be getting into that infamous time of year. So it does cause problems. And you know, when we see things like this, I often call this the moron approach, where people just start putting more on and more on, and that's the way they keep it clean. So, and dumping it right by a grate. So do you think that this causes some water quality problems? So I love Maine lakes, I gotta say. I've kayaked on many of them, all the way from the Richardsons and Mooselook, Maguntic, up through Moosehead and Chassuncook. So I'm gonna take Susan up on the offer to come up for our conference, but I love to get away. But I wanna tell you about my favorite lake, Lake George. The largest lake in the largest park system in the continental United States, in the Adirondack Park, with 32 miles long. Famous lake, some of the first battles of the United States Revolution were on Lake George. In the 1800s, the landscape architecture or landscape painting schools were big here. The dramatic vistas that were on the lake, the tranquility of the lake, 175 islands, many used for camping. It's a big resort tourist area, and that's our big economy. That's the Sagamore Resort on the island. So a lot of people are invested in the protection of Lake George, and that's one of the reasons that they brought the Waterkeeper. Lake George is a drinking water supply for thousands. Many take the drinking water right out of the lake, a couple of the municipalities. But even with a lake this large, we are seeing the impacts of road salt. So here's a study in my original parent organization, a fund for Lake George, which has just recently merged with the Lake George Association. We've been fortunate to be studying the lake for decades. Back to the 1980s, we started looking at road salt, and here you can see that road salt has tripled over the past 35, 40 years, and it's pretty much a straight line. And we all realize that chlorides build up, they're conservative, and once they get in our waters, they are in our waters for good. And we're very fortunate to have numerous organizations protecting and doing science on the lake. But around Lake George, they said 15,000 metric tons of public salt application in Lake George annually. And that's only the public side. And they always say SIMA, the Snow and Ice Management Association, the industry that really oversees winter management, says that half of the road salt application is private. So you can almost double that. So it could be as much as 30,000 tons of metric salt. So if it's 15,000 metric tons, you take a railroad cars, that's nearly 300 railroad cars, nearly 3 miles long. So that's quite a bit of salt that gets added to our watershed, to our waters. And this was we worked with the Albany Times Union out of Albany, New York, had them do a editorial, and this was what they used to put the editorial and help us address our salt concerns. But as with most watersheds, the chloride levels, Lake George is a big lake, billions of gallons. But the streams, so that it gets, diluted a lot, but the chloride levels in streams can be 150 times higher. And this is where we see those toxic levels that can really impact the biota and the macroinvertebrates, and we'll talk about those impacts as well. But it's not just the surface waters that we are seeing, but it's actually the groundwaters that are being impacted. This was a study done by the Adirondack Watershed Institute that we helped fund a few years ago. It's a research institute out of Paul Smith's College in the Adirondacks, where they studied private wells, the yellow dots, wells where there are no road influence to the wells. So where the well is not located down gradient of a road would be tributary, the runoff to it. 112 roads near local roads that are managed by local municipalities, and 114 of the wells were near state roads. And as we know, about half the soil actually, half the salt enters the soil. So here are the results of that. So here you can see, the amount of salt that gets added to state roads, and you can see the levels of sodium as it increases, 9 times higher than where there are no roads. 64% of the wells that were in this study downslope of state roads exceed sodium drinking water guidelines in New York State. So there you can see people with sodium restricted diets are now actually getting impacted by the winter maintenance. Look over at chlorides, you can see 156 times really what we call background levels. Here you can see the maximum levels in state roads, maximum level in chlorides in wells, 1,300, over 1,300. The toxic levels on a daily average are 900 milligrams per liter. So here you can see they're well exceeding that. So yes, there are concerns, but it's not just our drinking waters, it's also in our ecosystem. Salt can alter that important balance between the zooplankton and the phytoplankton. And the zooplankton, which eat the phytoplankton, which really results in the bloom. So here you can see higher salt concentrations, the zooplankton go down, therefore that leads to increased chlorophyll A levels. And what does that mean? That means increased blooms. And these are from studies done by the Jefferson Project, our partnership with IBM and Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute on Lake George. Here's something else. Such things as the banded mystery snail and the amphipods, which actually can graze on the algae and what grows. But here you can see as more salt gets added, these creatures are actually impacted by salt and can start dying off. And we see that their abundance get decreased. But it's not just the numbers of the creatures, but it's actually the sex. Here's studies done, again, by the Jefferson Project that said that due to particular amounts of road salt, 2 months of salt exposure can actually start changing the sex of frogs, in that there will become more male frogs than female frogs. Also impacts, fishing is a big tourist industry in Lake George. So the common road salt, again, can alter the growth of the trout hatchlings. And here you can see it's not just the road salt, but it's the other alternatives salts, which can cause even greater problems. So here you can see another big study in Lake George. If you all have the chance, take a look at the Mirror Lake, the studies, Mirror Lake and Lake Placid, where some great research has been done that, as we're aware, road salt densifies water, and that will sink to the bottom of the lake. And that actually is preventing the natural turnover of the lakes, which occur twice a year, and is really impacting and restricting the areas of the fishery. So it restricts that reoxygenation of the water column. So it can have some significant impacts. So as we get into this, what are the solutions that we can have? Well, here's one. We can always stick our big tires on the trucks, and sorry kids, no more snow days. And, you know, that's one way that we can start to address this solution or this situation. But what we've taken, and the approach that we've done here in Lake George, is that we've implemented what we call our model for protection, where we actually take partnership, innovation, and investment as an organization. We like to work with our science to solutions approach. And this is how we started addressing what we called our road salt reduction initiative. So I'll start moving into that. So when we talk about partnership, our work on Lake George actually started in road salt reduction with aquatic invasive species, where we started the Save Lake George Partnership, which stood for Stop Aquatic Invasives Entering Lake George, where we got all the municipalities around the lake. There's 9 municipalities, and we got them to sit around the table, got an MOU, got all the municipalities to sign that, and that's where we implemented the first mandatory inspection program east of the Mississippi on Lake George. But as we had everybody at the table, we said, let's take a look at our next issue, road salt. So we got them to sign an MOU regarding the application of road salt for winter maintenance and de-icing. We based it on science. Again, that's what our approach is, on science. So our decades of science and data collection. And we also got a basin-wide commitment on this. So really, we started working with the municipalities. And this is something, as you think on things that you can do in your watershed, this is a great start to get everybody on the table, start talking about the science, what we know, and what the issues are. Innovation. How did we invest it? So we actually took those municipalities and signed a best management agreement and best practices agreement. We will talk about those practices. We started hosting annual salt summits, where we would actually bring experts from regionally, in the state, and nationally to talk about the best ways to reduce road salt. We have sponsors, the various industry equipment suppliers, and we put that on at no cost, so that you know, it's tough to get these operators in these smaller rural municipalities to send their guys away for a day. And I hate to say it, it's mostly guys, not everybody, but a lot of these operators are guys. But they go to the conferences. So we put that on for free. We host that and bring in these experts. We have demos, and you can go to the Lake George Association website, and we've taped these for the past, and we just held our last one in October. We actually had a hybrid where it was in person and virtually online. And then all our decisions are based on data-based standard operation procedures. So the application rates, we started putting in cameras in to take pictures of the roads and evaluate the application rates and to verify what the application rates are. And we'll get into the data and how we use that to improve our practices and make better decisions. And then investment. This is where we kind of like to say we separate. So we actually put the money where the mouth is. Here you can see what we call the black boxes, or the data trackers, in the cabs so that we started tracking the salt and knowing what they were putting down. The techniques and equipment. Who doesn't like, you know, new equipment and better toys? And so we started investing in having partnerships with these various suppliers, and education and training. Training, bringing the experts in, talking about the practices. And it took a lot of donuts to get these guys' attention as well. But with that investment of equipment, experts, knowledge, and as I said, donuts, we got their attention and we started making progress. And we'll get into that right now. So I'm going to talk now about the 6 practices, best practices, which are measure, calibrate, prevent, analyze, improve, and optimize. So we will go through these, talk about that. So measure. If you want to reduce road salt, you've got to know how much you're putting down at first before you can say, we're going to reduce our road salt. We don't want to, people say, well, we don't want to apply more than 150 pounds per lane mile. Well, what are you applying right now? If you don't measure that, you're not going to know. So that's what we first started doing, was taking these tracking units, putting them into cabs. It was a little difficult at first. You know, the operators were thinking, oh, Big Brother's going to be looking over me and whatnot. But then as we developed, we turned this into more of kind of a challenge event. So here you can see actually a video. So this is what our consultants would see. We worked with De-Icing, a company out of Ontario, Waterloo, Ontario, who developed this software. So here you can see the trucks going through, and every 30 to 45 seconds, a ping would go up into the cloud. And of course, we all know where the cloud is, right? But we would record how much salt that they're applying. And then we could go back and start applying those application rates for truck A versus truck B. And if they both reach the level of service of bare road conditions, but truck A was applying twice as much road salt as truck B. Why was that? What were the conditions and what were the actual decisions that were going forward that were making that those decisions happen? The second practice, calibrate. You know, this is critical to the process because this equipment takes a beating. They're dumping tons of corrosive road salt on. Road salt can bind up, clump up. You can ask an operator, we ask them, you know, their gates are open, you know, 4 inches. And we go, how much are you applying? And they say, well, I'm putting down, you know, 200 pounds per lane mile. So we would actually put a tarp down, run their machine, see how much they were dumping, and then measure that. And sometimes we found out that they were actually adding twice as much road salt as what they said they were. So calibration is a must. Calibration needs to be done at least once a month. We've gotten municipalities to start doing it twice a month, where, you know, when we started this initiative back in 2015, they may have been doing it once a season if we were lucky. So really calibrating is important. So you can actually see how much you're putting down, and then you actually know and measure how much that you're doing. The third step, and where we started really gaining the attention from the operators, is prevent. To prevent the bond of the snow to the road, to prevent that snow from building up into ice. Because once it builds up into ice on the road, then you're scrambling, then you do have to dump the salt on. So what we have here, a picture of a live edge plow. So one way is to remove it more efficiently. And here you can see, instead of a straight blade across the bottom, an 11-foot blade, this actually has several segmented metal plates that actually conform to the road better. Think of the way a razor will conform multi-blades to your face when you're shaving. This is the same way that it reacts with the road. And this is where our initiative really took off. When we started, we hooked up with a company, Metal Plus, with live edge plows. And you can actually see the way that this plow will bend and conform to the road. So it is really removing much more snow from the road, preventing that buildup. And this is where we actually use that data collection to show that we were effective and efficiently And this was reducing our road salt. So we're in the one town, the town of Lake George. Truck 13 had the live edge plow for the first month. This was a couple years ago. Truck 42 did not. And you can see the discrepancy between the two rates. You can see the application rates. What we did is after a month, we switched the live edge plow from truck 13 to truck 42. And what we saw was that truck 13's rates went up 25%, but truck 42's rates actually started coming down. And this is when we started to get the attention of the drivers, when they really started believing, and then there started to become a competition. And once you got that, then, you know, you had their ears and they started listening. And we actually, there was one highway superintendent, when we started this initiative, he was a true curmudgeon. And he just said, there is no way this is ever going to work, and I am not going to do this. And when he saw these live edge plows, you know, his literal words to me were, I will eat crow, because this stuff actually works, and that he saw nothing that worked better, which was quite a change. And that's when we knew we were finally getting somewhere. Excuse me. So I mentioned earlier, cameras. We started putting roadside cameras up along the road, and then we could see the effectiveness of the live edge plow during particular routes that had the same grades, the same elevations, but the one truck had a live edge plow, the other didn't. You could start seeing how more effective they were. Okay, what else? Another practice is to prevent the bond is brining, which is really the pre-application of salt water. So what you basically do is you go out ahead of the storm, a day ahead of, and spray the road. Think of the way that you coat a pan before you cook, so you don't want your food to cook. So it really helps prevent the bond. It buys more time. If you go out and spray the road a day before the storm, you can actually buy those operators 2 hours in the morning. So instead of having them come in at 3 in the morning, they can come in at 5, which is a lot when they're putting in 10 to 12-hour days. And then you could do the comparison. You know, your rock salt, 250 pounds per lane mile, but when you use liquid and brine, you're actually reducing that application rate to 50 to 100 pounds per lane mile. Less salt being added, more effective. It reduces that scatter, stays on the road. And as soon as the snow comes, it will liquefy and create that liquid that will prevent the bond. So this is where we started analyzing as well. So this is a series of camera shots from these conditions. So here you can see the way the conditions change. This is when we started bringing in weather analysis and forecasting and reports, starting to learn the temperature of the roads. Road temperature sensors are very important to know what the temperature of the road is. Is it going up or down? And then start seeing what the removal rates are, and then comparing route to route to see how they are doing. And one of the best things is you get to the end, you'll actually see, you know, it's always said that the plow operator's best friend is the sun. And you can see the way at the end of this, the way the sun comes out and really starts clearing that road. So we started analyzing, using these cameras really helped the operator. It also helped the operators because they could actually remotely check these cameras and see what the roads or conditions were, and then make a decision whether they needed to send their crew out or not. Here's another analysis. We started moving from the roadside cameras to cameras on dashboards so that they would patrol areas, because there's always areas on their routes that would be colder than other sections where they don't get the sun, where there can be more buildup. So here you can see a series of dash cams where they are seeing that there are clear road conditions and they can turn off their salt application routes, or where there are steeper conditions, higher elevations where they need to use that road salt. And this was really, so we want to take these conditions that you see circled right there and to get more of a condition like this. So how can you do that analysis, understand what your route is, your road conditions, and make these decisions to make better operational decisions. Then we started bringing our experts in again. I mentioned Rakib Mir from VASIS, from up in Waterloo. We worked with Phil Sexton, WIT advisors. And we worked with the operators, started showing them the routes, started showing their application rates, asking them what their decisions were, why truck A versus truck B was adding twice as much salt, what the weather conditions were that precipitated that. So analyze, that's our fourth practice. The fifth is improve. So how can you improve this? You got this data. Here you can see a graph of temperatures in Celsius on the bottom, and your application rates are going up on your y-axis. And here you can basically see the best fit curve. It's kind of a level line through there. But what this is demonstrating is that this operator doesn't understand how salt reacts with the temperature. Salt becomes less effective, standard road salt, at the lower temperatures. We're talking -14 Celsius, or when it's up near zero. It's most effective, you know, around -6 Celsius, around that 18-degree mark. You know, it can be pretty effective. But here you can see that they're adding the same amount. But what you really want is graph like this. So this operator understands you do not add as much when it's very cold, or when it's near freezing, you don't need to add as much, because a lot of times the roads will take care of that, the heat that's on the roads. And then you want to maximize it when your temperatures are allowing you to maximize it. So that's when we talk about improving. Improving, again, we were talking about the graphs, and I showed you a few of those. What we always like to see to our drivers, on the bottom, the x-axis, or the number of pings, or the every 30 seconds, what that application rate was. And here you can see the applications on the y-axis. So we always want our operators to have those histograms move to the left so that we can start reducing those road salt application rates. And when you start putting all these practices together, you can optimize. And when I mentioned the SWIM certification earlier, this is what we're talking about. So sustainable winter management. So when you take the measure, the calibrate, prevent, analyze, improve, and then optimize your practices. And this is actually a certification that we are working with WIT advisors. Phil Sexton has developed this, and we have 3 of our municipalities now around Lake George are SWIM certified, and doing these measures that optimize their road salt reduction. So is this really working? You know, I showed all these pictures, the equipment, the graphs. Well, the proof is our little town of Hague that I live in. We have about 800 year-round residents, and they have actually become the leader in the road salt reduction initiative around Lake George. So the proof is in the numbers. We started working with them 2016. They didn't even want to work with us 2015 when we started the initiative. So here you can see the amount of tons of road salt that they have been applying over the 5 years and how they've decreased. They've reduced by over 50%, but it's not just the amounts. Here you can see Hague Brook, the 2 graphs on the left side, chloride, and you can see the way that the top are more storm events, the bottom graph are base flow events, and you can see the downward trend. So we are actually seeing water quality improvements from our gauges. Now this is from stream monitoring stations that we have on Hague Brook. We have Westbrook, which is another stream in another town that has one of the continuous monitoring on it. And you can see that there's an increase there. So we can see that those annual averages in Hague Brook, where they're reducing road salt, is actually showing improvements in water quality. We are actually having our drivers lead by example. They're setting up brine manufacturing plants, actually providing this to other municipalities. Early adapters are becoming the trainers. It took us a while to get these operators to start to listen to us. Now these early adapters, these operators are so energized, they are now becoming the trainers. and we just sit back. When you can have an operator stand up at one of our salt summits, they are talking operator to operator. Operators are always going to be a little bit hesitant and questionable to listen to, you know, an environmentalist or an engineer or somebody else. But when operators are talking to operators, they start listening. The town of Hague, they're actually considering liquid-only routes. They're not even going to use solid rock salt on some of their routes. They're only going to use liquid, and as you saw, that can mean significant reductions in the amount of chlorides added. Use data and verify with cameras. Again, use that measuring device, use the cameras and validate those numbers, and they're committed to progress. You know, it took what we call the leap of faith to have them listen to us, but now with these successes, they're actually seeing the benefits. They're seeing the reduction in their budgets for purchasing salt. The town boards are seeing that, giving them the big attaboys. They save the money, and now they can get some better equipment. So our next steps, we want to continue with the brine expansion, let more municipalities understand that. It is as we said, it's a leap of faith to get them to trust this technology and this practice, but it is working. New York State DOT, the biggest applicator of road salt in our basin, we actually got them to come on with a pilot study, and here you can see a sign in our watershed low salt area, so they've actually committed to a reduction pilot. The governor, Governor Hochul right now has set up a road salt task force. I'm pleased to have been appointed to that. And we are actually going to be taking a look at that statewide and pointing to Lake George as one of the models for that. The private sector, again, we did focus on the municipalities because we were able to get them to the table. But now we need to move to the private sector and get them aboard. It hasn't been as easy. But one of the ways we want to do that is to create a brine co-op. So can we work with the municipalities, get them to set up, we can purchase some brine from them and then make that available for our private contractors. So in closing, the takeaways, Lake George Association has developed a model of protection based on partnership, innovation, and investment, applying a science to solutions approach. Road salt reduction can be achieved through applying the best practices, we went over those, and technology to engage operators to self-assess, take a look at their routes, take a look at their numbers, and develop sound policies. And this is very important while keeping the roads safe. We have not seen an increase in accidents, and the roads have remained safe. And that operators who are the early adapters can become the voice of road salt reduction. We can stand back, and when you've gotten that, you've reached nirvana, and they really provide the training for further implementation. So with that, I will close. I always like to try to get a picture of my daughter in a presentation. So here she is. Usually have her swimming in the lake, but took that with a snowman in our front yard. So I want to thank Susan and Maine Lakes, and there's my contact on the bottom, C. Navistsky at lakegeorgewaterkeeper.org. And I guess we'll open it up for questions right now. So,
yeah, so there's a few questions in the Q&A, but if anybody's putting their questions in the chat, if you don't mind copying them over the Q&A, that way we can keep track of them a little better. Somebody wanted to know if, well, first of all, thank you very much for sharing that. And I am equally intrigued as when I heard it, you know, similar the beginning of this a couple of years ago. And, you know, I hope we can sort of make a plan, you know, as a result of this for some next steps for Mainers, but either at the municipal level or bigger. So thanks so much. Let's see, somebody wanted to know if the measurement systems you put in there for the trucks, if they work for salt and sand combinations?
Yes, they would. Yes, you can do that for all materials that come out of the back of the truck. Just be careful, because what we found is some of our municipalities, and I know there can be obviously, you know, gravel, dirt roads, you know, in some of those northern rural areas in Maine. We have them here in the Adirondacks. Be careful, because we found that a lot of times people were using 50-50 salt sand mix, which really they think they're saving, we're reducing salt, we're only using 50%, but you wind up putting down so much material, you almost sometimes add more salt when you add it up, because they instead of adding 200 pounds per lane mile of road salt, they're adding, 900 pounds per lane mile of the sand salt mix. And if you do the math, it can actually be more salt. So, but it can get other materials, yes.
Interesting. Okay. Somebody wanted to know how many road miles are in that little town of Hague.
Little town of Hague actually maintain, they do the state roads as well as their local roads, and they have a total of 67 lane miles in the town.
Wow, that's impressive. That's impressive.
Oh, these guys have got a lot of energy. They're amazing. Oh God.
Yeah, and it sounds like we have to find a town like that in Maine, with a lot of lakes and rivers and streams, and get them on board. Because it seems like
again,
having
I know
pilot.
I threw a lot, Susan, here, but pick a couple of these things. The equipment was good. The MOUs were a great way to start as well. So
great. Can you address a strategy to begin measuring salt in lakes? What should we measure, and are there criteria for identifying good testing locations?
Well, in Lake George, it was started back in the 1980s. It was called the Mid-Lake Survey, and they actually took samples in the middle of the lake. Lake George gets quite deep, up to 193 feet. But that's where we took the water samples, and we took that at 8 standard locations along the lake, and have done that every month over the past over 40 years. So really it's just grabbing, it's called, grab samples really is what we did. And that's how we did it. You can also check the stratification if you want to see, to get deeper and use those type of samples, get deeper in the water. But it's really just a standard anion test that you run, which will give you your chloride levels. And there's also chloride probes that people can get to put in streams, depending on how sophisticated you would like to be. But the lakes are always less than the streams, and that's what we said. And it's ironic, I didn't touch on this earlier, but in our streams, our average chloride levels are usually the highest at late summer, early fall, and that's when you get the biggest influence of your base flow. We have the lowest levels in stream, you have the most influence from our base flow. And again, we said chloride is conservative. It doesn't dissipate, and it'll wind up concentrating in our streams. So,
yeah. Let's see, there's a bunch of good questions. Can you speak to the cost differential between a standard salt sand operation versus a brine salt operation?
Yeah, great question, the return on investment. So to really start up a brining operation, there is an investment, but you recoup it. What we found is that you get the return on investment probably in about 3 to 4 years, once the drivers understand the brine, understand the application rates, and become comfortable with it. So, and let's see, I don't want to get people too dizzy, but going back, you can see the brine operator on the back, the spreader. You can go from a Cadillac to a lower version, but you can usually get that spray applicator on the back for about $3,000-4,000. You get the applicator, the tank on the back. You got to retrofit your truck. We do have the brine manufacturing where they can purchase those brine makers. You can get those for like $29,000 to $35,000. Such companies as De-Icing Depot, or there's also companies that make brine and they can deliver it to you, and you could just have it delivered and put in those storages. So that gives you, an idea on the outlay. It is, and we're talking rural DPWs who, budgets are tight this time, nowadays, and you've got to be conscious. But again, that return on investment can come back in a few years as you start reducing your rock salt. The other thing is that this is a water quality improvement. So check with the Maine, see if you have water quality grants, because this reduces the runoff and pollutants that get into our streams and surface waters.
Yeah, and actually, while we're on that topic of funding, can you, this was a significant project for your organization. Yeah. Can you give us a ballpark, kind of what it cost you to do those initial years of getting everybody involved in the salt summits and all that, and then if you know who funded that, or if you could share?
Yeah, our organization really foot the bill. We're fortunate. We have, so we were putting forth about $150,000 to $200,000 a year. Part of that was we got an agreement with Metal Plus, the live edge plows, where our organization actually became a wholesaler. So a standard straight metal plow around 10, 11,000. We were able to get the live edge plows for about 15 to 16,000. Wholesale, a lot of times equipment suppliers will have them 18 to 20,000. So we purchased these and granted them. We paid for the consultants, the WIT advisors, and the ACES to work with the drivers. They would have weekly calls with them. So it was an investment on our part, but again, that really, and these are some of the grant fundings that you can reach out to try to get. But now that we've set up the model, we think that people can turn to this and understand it a lot better. The tracking systems, you can get the trackers in the trucks for about, $500 to $1,000. To calibrate, all you need is a tarp and a scale. So, you're talking whatever, $25, $50 to calibrate. So those can be very important calibrating to save road salt. So there's various practices, again, that can lead to big savings and reduction.
Yeah. Let's see, I think you'll be able, I think we can get this question. Your earlier slide showed a straight line increase. I assume that means in chloride. What data shows that mitigation is reducing the amount of salt in the lake? You are using less salt, but will it affect the lake? Is there a projection when the lake will see an improvement?
Yeah, great question. We actually did a study, and one of our co-authors was a soil scientist from the University of Maine, Steve Norton, who's just a great guy to work with. And we found that it would take, if we reduced road salt applications in the Lake George Basin by 50%, that it would take about a 20 to 25 year period to see that change in the lake itself. Now, we started seeing it in Hague Brook, as I showed in one of these slides right there. But in the lake, we haven't started seeing that, and it's going to take a while, and it's going to take a concentrated effort from all municipalities. And the way that we did that, we actually used some of the other cations, such as calcium, because as sodium chloride is added, it breaks down. Sodium would actually attach to the soil particles and release the calcium and the other cations. And we saw that increase or decrease depending on the application rates in our streams. And that's how we used to calculate what the model was that would show the reduction in Lake George. So, and that was a published paper. I'd be glad to share that with folks if they're interested.
Great. So, and yeah, we'll send out an email. If you want to send that to us, we can, we'll follow up to everybody who attended, and then everybody who registered and wasn't able to attend. We usually send out a recording, and we can send that out. If you think of anything like that to send me, I can forward it to all the attendees. A couple more good questions. I think we Oh, there's my time. Yeah, we got a few more minutes.
Sure. Yep.
Somebody mentioned that that a community in Maine is now spreading salt for dust control during the summer. Have you heard of that? And do you know?
I have not. You know, I've thought I heard of calcium at times. I have not heard of salt. But geez, that sounds like something we wouldn't support.
Yeah, right.
I don't know all the conditions on that, but that's something we have not encountered here.
Yeah,
I think we would question that practice.
Yeah, interesting. Somebody asked what your thoughts were about limited liability around litigation in a community. Let's see, around litigation in a community as a means of decreasing salt usage in a parking lot, you know, business settings.
Yeah. No, great question. You know, they're obviously your neighbor, the folks in New Hampshire, started that program with their Green Snow Pro program to kind of make sure that contractors are certified, and that leads to the limited liability. That was actually one of the topics that we had in our Salt Summit back in October, and I'll share those links with you, Susan. I'll forward that information to you. So I think that's something we really want to move towards here in New York. We have not had the success with it or you know, the progress that we wanted. We had Ted Deers from the Maine Water, what is it, the Department of Environmental Water Quality, I think, was our keynote speaker. That was the second time he was. He's a great presenter. That is a great topic, one that we just haven't had the success here, you know, to move that along in New York State, but one that we really, it's been on our objectives list. But from what we hear, they haven't lost a challenge in New Hampshire so far, knock on wood, I think. So it seems like it's a good move.
Yeah. Oh yeah, somebody posted a note in the Q&A about the Green Snow Pro program in New Hampshire.
Yep.
Here's just kind of a general question. Oh, actually, so quickly, the person who mentioned a salt in the summer, she did say it is actually a combination of salt and calcium. So
okay, that
probably makes more sense. And somebody else mentioned that it's sprayed on wet and then it binds to the dust.
Yeah.
You touched on this briefly, but but what are in general? What are the general problems with water quality and chloride?
Well, with chloride, it you know, there's a corrosion. What we've actually been finding that some of the findings of the study from with our colleagues up at the Adirondack Watershed Institute, you know, you get too much chloride in your well water, it's actually started corroding the inside appliances. It actually rusted out a water heater in one home. There's also, people thought, you know, there's proof that that's what led to some of the release of lead in Flint, Michigan. They changed their water supply, started drawing it out of the water, higher chlorides, started releasing the lead from the older pipes. So that's some of the concern with chlorides. It also affects the taste, obviously. And other part of sodium chloride, the sodium. If that starts becoming too high, people with sodium restricted diets are unable to drink their water. They'll have to get a different water source. So that's just some of the problems that you notice with the water, besides, you know, the ecological impacts that we were talking about as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the heavier
denser water settles to the bottom of the lake, can prevent those natural limnological turnovers that occur. You know, we found, and you know, one of the programs we have on Lake George is monitor algae, because we feel that algae, we're, you know, very fortunate. Lake George, 40 feet of clarity. ligotrophic lake, very low nutrient levels. Phosphorus is around 5, parts per billion. So we're very low. So we don't have a lot of algae growth, but we started seeing more algae. And some of the concern is that we're actually believing that, the more algae growth, part of that is that we are seeing more salt-tolerant algae species. Also, as the zooplankton, which feed on the algae, are not as tolerant to the chlorides in the salt, and they decrease, leading to the increased algae growth.
Yeah. Huh. Any work with, somebody mentioned studying chloride levels in greater Portland area streams, and they regularly measure chlorides in the winter greater than 2,000 milligrams per liter, micrograms per liter. In streams near parking lots or just after storm events. And she wondered have you ever worked with parking lot owners to reduce salting rates?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, that's the private sector that we are just trying to work in. There's a couple of resorts that we are working with. We want them to become part of that Brine co-op. We've had a couple of the resorts meet with our consultants, Phil Sexton, and what he called a discovery process to evaluate their practices, evaluate their equipment. And some of the big thing, that we told them, and if you notice, is the tracking of chlorides into buildings, where actually it can start rusting their doorways, door frames, and ruining their carpets right inside the door, which is something they all notice. And we started working with a zero chloride product from company, and it just dropped. I can't believe, but I can get that information. But they started spraying this non-chloride product right at their doorways. So that's something as well that we started working with the municipalities. But yes, that is the private sector has not been, we haven't had the success again. And we started with the municipalities around here because, again, going back to the beginning, that's who we had sitting at the table when we were discussing aquatic invasive species. And then we moved on to road salt as the issue.
Okay. I have one more question, and then it's 5:01, so we're ending right on time. Somebody said they've been monitoring salt levels in a stream, and that those chloride levels are always low. And she said if streams are always higher than a lake and her stream is low, can she then conclude that she doesn't have an issue in the lake where the stream's going? I mean, if you're,
sorry,
yeah, so if your stream, if the levels of chloride in your streams is low, you can make the assumption that the chlorine in the lake levels is going to be low.
No, I'm not sure on that. It may be an isolated stream if they monitor a couple streams. The other thing is that, again, when they sampled, where they sampled, and, a lot of times, as we said, that chloride can concentrate lower in the lake as it's denser. So I'd be vigilant on the testing.
Okay.
Also
Great.
Find out, where they live, check with their municipalities. Are they adding salt? And find out about that.
Great. Well, thank you so much for answering so many questions. Thank you to everybody who joined us for the great questions you provided. We'll send out the recording and keep in touch with you. And Chris, yeah, when we have an in-person talk again, maybe we can have you come back, and maybe, we can have a roundtable or some kind of small working group, something like that, and where we could, maybe we'll make some progress before you come back, and then maybe we could have a working session at a conference where we really pick your brain and try to come up with some action steps for me.
Well, As long as there's a kayak trip on some of those lakes, I'm ready for it. So
Okay, we can provide
sounds
that.
great. Thank you, Susan.
All right.
I appreciate it. Thank you,
so
everyone.
much. Thanks, everybody.